People across the country are trying to convince the federal government to stop the deportation of an activist and single mother from Guatemala. Lucy Granados came to Canada 9 years ago. She's been living in Montreal and has become an advocate for the rights of undocumented women and workers. Canada Border Services officials detained Granados late last month, and she is set to be deported back to Guatemala on Friday. Vigils were held for her last night in Montreal, Fredericton, and in Tatamagouche. Stacey Gomez has helped organize the event. She is the Maritimes coordinator for Breaking the Silence Maritimes Guatemala Solidarity Network. Good morning, Stacey.
Good morning.
So why this vigil in Tatamagouche? What's the connection?
So firstly, there is a center called the Tatamagouche Center that is a center for solidarity and specifically with Guatemala. So in addition to that, there's a North Shore Committee of Breaking the Silence, Maritimes Guatemala Solidarity Network. And so that's why it was fitting to hold this event as part of the national action that was happening that same day, and as you mentioned, in different parts of the country.
And Lucy Granados has been in Canada, as I mentioned a minute ago, for 9 years. What has stood out for you about her story and why it's compelling and why so many people have decided to hold these vigils?
Yes, as you mentioned, she's been here for 9 years. Basically, her whole case really highlights the unjust nature of our immigration system. As you mentioned, she's a single mother of 3 children. She applied to be a refugee to this country due to she had to flee Guatemala because of gang violence that killed her husband. But under our rules, she was not allowed to stay as a refugee. She now has a humanitarian application for permanent residence and has not yet heard back. And it was last summer that she actually submitted her application, and that's what caused attention to be placed on her. And CBSA, Canada Border Services agents, 4 of them came to her house early in the morning and violently arrested her and injured her arm. So for me, hearing those details, it's very heart-wrenching. It's very shocking. I think a lot of people, when they hear that, I spoke to someone yesterday and they were saying, we think when we heard that we were surprised because that makes us think of the situation in the U.S. and we don't realize that that's actually happening in our communities. So I think that's part of the compelling part. Is that people don't expect that, and that doesn't reflect their values of what Canada means for them. And I think also Lucy is a symbol of other undocumented women. As you mentioned, she's a community organizer that's raising this issue and advocating for other undocumented women like herself who face specific gendered issues as undocumented women.
What would those specific gendered issues be, Stacey?
So I think that they're particularly vulnerable, and for instance, they may be forced to stay in difficult, abusive situations, and it may be difficult for them to leave. And also, they may have children, and in Quebec specifically, where Lucy is, you have to pay exorbitant amounts for your children to be able to go to school if they don't have status here. So these are some of the challenges that they might specifically face.
As I understand, Lucy's children are in Guatemala and she's been supporting them from here in Canada. Her application for humanitarian status was last summer. So in your view, her case has been delayed and caught up in red tape and she hasn't had a chance to stay in Canada?
Yes, exactly. So we think it's unfair that she's not even received a response yet. But we also want to emphasize that she's a valuable member of her community, and we want her to receive permanent residence so that she can bring her children here. Because of our unjust immigration system, she has not been able to do that.
What has been the federal government's response to the petition to keep her here, at least while her status is evaluated?
So there was a request for an administrative stay that was submitted to the Canada Border Services Agency that was denied on Monday. And to my knowledge, none of the ministers, neither Minister of Immigration Hussein or Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale or Trudeau have responded to or acknowledged the case. And as you mentioned, there's a petition. There's now 11,000 people and counting that have signed the petition urging the Canadian officials to let Lucy stay in Canada.
And what was the vigil last night like at Tatamagouche Centre?
So there were about 30 people that came together from the Tatamagouche Centre community, from the BTS committee in the North Shore, and also community members. And so I spoke about Lucy's case, and someone from the Tatamagouche Centre also spoke, Josie Baker, and she shared more about the context of the realities and injustices that undocumented people face in the country. And then Catherine Anderson from the BTS North Shore Committee shared about the political context in Guatemala, which is important to take into account in the situation.
And of course, we haven't at CBC independently evaluated or been able to confirm your allegations of her violent arrest, but do you have any indication of how Lucy's doing?
Well, Lucy has been emergency hospitalized twice since she was violently arrested and detained on the 20th of March. And her mental and physical health have been deteriorating in that time. She has had a lack of access to sunlight, except for when people come to visit her. And so that's why we held the Lights for Lucy vigil yesterday. I think people are also shocked to hear those kind of inhumane conditions under which people are treated in immigrant detention. So I think that she's a very brave person, and I'm sure that she's doing her best under these very difficult conditions.
Stacey, thank you for telling us about the case and the vigil. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
That's Stacey Gomez. She's Maritime's coordinator for Breaking the Silence, Maritime's Guatemala Solidarity Network. We reached her in Tatamagouche.